Well, I'm back at it again, working on this 95 Ford F-250. I just put the new mile marker 449SS hubs on here yesterday, and nothing's wrong with the hubs or the wheel bearings or anything. The reason I've got this thing up in the air like this is because as I was repacking the wheel bearings and putting the hubs on, I noticed that the brake pads were really thin. I don't know if you guys can see that. And I didn't have the proper brake pads to do the job yesterday, so I had to go on there with the older brake pads. In fact, I've already done the driver's side, and you can see just how dangerously thin these pads really are. That would definitely not pass inspection. They're already starting to crack and show signs of high temperature damage, as well as age. Judging by the amount of corrosion on these things, these pads have been on here for a very long time. So definitely time to get some new ones. The pads I chose are the Wagner Severe Duty pads. These pads are the same OEM friction material as found on the Motorcraft pads. They have a lot higher coefficient of friction, so they'll have a lot more grab on the rotors, and they'll resist high temperature fading much better than standard pads. They weren't cheap, but they're definitely worth the money. Everything comes wrapped up in this outer package here, which you can kind of get a look at what they look like. Really nice pads. Definitely worth the money. They also come with the spring retainers, which are important when you look at them because they're not the same. One goes on the top and one goes on the bottom, as you can see by the little indentation there. So you definitely want to be careful as you're putting these on. So pads are very high quality, not cheap, but I don't skimp on brakes. I take brakes very seriously and try to do as good a job as I can, and I'll spend a little bit of extra money for the peace of mind of having higher than average stopping power, particularly since you know, you can't predict in the future how the truck's going to be loaded or what you're going to be towing. So it's always good to err on the side of caution and put the odds in your favor and just have the best brakes you can possibly have. So the first thing to do, of course, once you get the thing up in the air and get the tire off, is like most cars, you've got a little bit of a ridge here where the pads weren't making contact, and that's going to make this caliper darn near impossible to get off unless you can find a way to compress these pistons. And the best way I found to do it is to use a large pry bar like this. Take the flat end of it here and stick it in between the steering knuckle and the back of the caliper like that, and pry outwards. And that's going to force the caliper outwards and the pistons inwards. And that's actually a good maintenance item to do even if you're not changing brakes, because what happens is that these pistons stay in the same position more or less, sometimes for years, depending upon how often the truck is driven. And just like the rotor, they can develop sort of a rust ridge in here, especially if you don't bleed the brakes routinely, and the pistons can seize in the calipers and cause problems. So I've actually moved this thing back and forth with the method I just described several times, and believe it or not, there was a rough spot in here that I felt give way once I started doing it. So that's definitely a good idea to avoid brake problems in the future. So right now this caliper is tight and not coming off without a fight. So we'll go ahead and use the pry bar, give it a little bit of persuasion. Depending upon what kind of condition your vehicle is in, it could be kind of hard to do this, but this one wasn't too bad. Maybe you guys can see the caliper move, I'm not really sure. Okay, that's all it took. Caliper is sticking out a little bit and is nice and loose. The next thing you're going to need is a 1/2 inch socket to get the upper and lower caliper bolts off. So we'll do that next. These bolts usually aren't that tight, especially since I just did them yesterday. Once you get the 2 bolts off, that's what they look like. You can go ahead and tilt the caliper away from the bottom or from the top, doesn't matter. And go ahead and set it up on the leaf spring because you don't want to put any undue tension on that brake line. So that wasn't too bad. Then you can make a note as to how these pads are put in so you can put them in the right way. We'll go ahead and take these out. Just kind of rocking back and forth. Well, there goes the one of the anti-rattle things. These pads are in pretty sad condition. Too bad I didn't have them, the new ones, yesterday when I did the hubs. They just pop right out. And you could use these same springs, but I'm going to go ahead, since I have the new ones anyway, and put the new ones in. And sometimes these guys are loose enough that you can get them out by hand. But as you can see, what you have to do next is, just like yesterday with the hub job, is take off the brake caliper adapter. You don't have quite the clearance that you need to get these things out of here. So to get that off, what you have to do, just like the caliper, only with much larger bolts, is take off 1 bolt there and 1 bolt down there, and then the brake caliper adapter will come right off. To do that, you're going to need a 13/16 socket and a large breaker bar. They're tightened to about 150 to 200 pounds. once you bust them loose with the breaker bar, you can go ahead and use a regular ratchet, take them off. And there's what the adapter looks like. Go ahead and pop off these springs quite easily now, hopefully. I'm going to have to maybe get a screwdriver for that one. And just lay them on the ground in the same orientation they came off of to go on with the new parts. So now what I want to do, I want to get into that caliper a little bit with a combination of toothbrush for the dust seals and a wire brush for the pistons and surrounding areas where the caliper mates up to it, and take the same tools to the brake caliper adapter and just get all this nasty dust and grease out of here, caliper grease, and then I'll blow it out with compressed air, put the clips on there, and then we'll be ready to put the adapter back in. Okay, now that the caliper is all cleaned up, as well as the brake caliper adapter, I got the anti-rattle springs put in, and they just basically press right on up in there. And that's another good reason to clean all these surfaces. That way everything is going to fit nice and flush and be easy to get in. And I'll try to squeeze in here, but you want to make sure that that clip is centered relative to the rotor, otherwise these edges can contact the rotor and make a continuous grinding or squealing noise. So now what we have to do is torque down these bolts to about 160 to 200 foot-pounds. You could get them good and snug, but I don't take chances with brakes. Could mean the difference between life and death, so it's always good to torque things down to specification. And I just got one of these clicker wrenches. Sometimes the sockets get stuck on the bolts. You gotta go in the opposite direction and get them loose. And with these clicker wrenches, what I like to do is, if I'm not going to use it for a while, I'll just go ahead and unload it. That way the spring or the mechanism in there is not going to stretch over time and lose its calibration. So we'll set that aside. Put this back to tighten. Now we know that the caliper adapter is installed properly. Make sure the springs are flush and clean. And now it's time to go in with our pads. And these are brand spanking new. It's not very often you actually get a pad that's just a couple of months old. A lot of times they'll be sitting on a shelf or something. Here's what they look like. They got a chamfer on both ends, as well as a slot in the middle to help gases escape. And it's just kind of obvious how to go in. Just kind of fits in that groove. Push against that spring right there to put that in the groove. And we're ready to go in with the next one. Now these brakes seem to be a little bit wider than the ones that came off. That's only a good thing, because now you have more brake swept area. So that rust ridge is what's causing that noise, and that's going to be slowly ground away over time, I think, as the pads go ahead and bed in. I'm going to go ahead and stick in the next pad behind it, and we'll be ready to go on with our caliper. Okay, there's what our caliper looks like. This truck is the F-250 heavy duty model, so it's got the dual piston calipers and pretty generously sized brake pads. That's what they look like all installed. And now that the caliper is clean, what you want to do is inspect these dust seals. Just kind of press in on them, make sure they're nice and supple, not hard, not leaking or wet or moist. So these look really good. And the way this caliper is designed, you've got a resting area there, and you got a little cutout area here. You want to put that in first, down the bottom, and gradually tilt that up inward. I'm going to try to handle this big thing with one hand. So you just line it up down there at the bottom like that, and slowly rock it in. Now this next task takes two hands. I went ahead and took a little bit of the dielectric grease or silicone grease and coated the caliper guide pins, and they'll just go ahead and slide in right back there and fix the caliper in place. You can see how these anti-rattle springs work because it's keeping pressure on this caliper, making sure this thing doesn't rattle around. Okay, the caliper is all installed. The bolts are just hand tight, and it's free to move back and forth. That's how these calipers work. As the pistons go out, it'll push the whole caliper in this way and kind of pinch against the rotor. And these bolts are going to be tightened to 25 foot-pounds. Just want to make sure everything is tightened to specification. And now for the bottom one. And there we go. Brake job is largely finished. Everything's torqued down to the right amount. And if you remember earlier in the video, to get this caliper off of here, I had to make sure the pistons were forced all the way back. And there's quite a gap in there now. And as you do that, as the pistons go back, you're going to displace fluid, putting that back up into the system. So you want to make sure that your brake reservoir doesn't overfill. And I got to take a little bit more fluid out of there, but it's not too bad. I already took some out from the other side. And one last thing before you forget, before you drive it off anywhere, before you put anything back together to the point where you can even drive it anywhere, you want to make sure you pump that pedal to bring that piston right back in contact with the pads. Otherwise, you could have a pretty serious accident. And I'll show you what I mean. So right now I don't have any force on the pedal, and if you were about to take off and go anywhere, this is what would happen if you tried to stop. You would have absolutely zero braking action. So you want to make sure you slowly pump that pedal back up. Didn't take long this time because the pads are thicker. And now I have a nice firm pedal, and this truck is ready to drive. You never want to forget to do that. So, I'm going to go ahead and put the thing back together. I see a lot of corrosion on the inner wheel here. I'm going to take some grease, coat the inner surface there, and that way, number one, the tire will be easier to get off of here in the future, and number two, this corrosion will be kept to a minimum. So, this was a impromptu brake job. Came about because I was doing work on the hubs anyway, the inner and outer wheel bearings, as well as a manual automatic hub conversion. Found out that the brakes were just completely shot. Pads are just non-existent basically, and heat checked. So I quickly went to the parts store and found the best brakes that I could, put them on here, and decided to show you guys how to do the brake job, or at least how I do them. And they're really not too bad on the this particular model F-250 with the heavy-duty suspension, 1995. The calipers and everything are pretty much designed like on a typical car, like the Crown Victoria I'm still dismantling before I haul it off to the junkyard. It's just that the parts are a lot bigger and everything. So hopefully this video will help you guys out and save you some money doing the job yourself.